Maybe it's the fact that I grew up a pastor's kid, or watching preachers trying to cast out demons from the possessed in Paraguay. Or maybe it's my family kept moving into haunted houses over and over again. But I've always known that there was a world beyond what we could see, whether we call it spirit, or angels, or ghosts, or simply the supernatural. My story begins when I am 3, seeing a woman sitting on the steps inside our house. And it continues to this day here in Pittsburgh, where my wife constantly asks, "Did you see that?" My name is Chiwan Choi, and this is Are You There, Ghost? It's me, Chiwan. Of course, the title is a take on one of the first books I ever read. I am a writer, and I will be speaking with other writers about their experiences with the beyond, with the paranormal, and how those experiences have impacted their work. Because what are writers if not ghost makers?
Welcome everyone to another episode of Are You There, Ghost? It's me, Chiwan, and I'm your beloved host, Chiwan. And today I have a very, very special guest, a dear friend from back in the day, Tanya Frank, or Tanya, as you know, depending on what accent I'm using. Tanya, I met in Los Angeles, is now in London, and she's the author of Zig-Zag Boy memoir, which she'll be telling us a lot more about. So please welcome Tanya. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm just kind of calculating in my head how long it's been since I last saw you, and actually how long it's been since I first met you. And Chi, it's probably over 20 years since I first met you at,
Yeah,
at Jack Grape's writing class.
yeah. And then we just had a lot of meetings and became friends,
Yep.
talked a lot about books.
And you
And I was lucky enough to know you when you were first coming up with this book.
Yes, yeah. We started off meeting at your loft apartment. I think no, we had a place in Los Angeles, a little office somewhere, and then at your loft apartment, and then at Chris's house. So many weeks of sitting round over drinks and tortilla chips and talking story. Yeah. The one thing, Chi, that I think you taught me that has really stayed with me and that I teach my students in turn is like the visual component of story. Scene, scene, scene. That is what you drummed into me so much that it's just such a big part of my writing world and everything that I teach. And I think it's really it's been such a fundamental thing and such an important thing. So thank you for that.
Yeah. You know what? I got to tell you, last couple of weeks, I've been binging on Top Boy on Netflix. Anytime I watch something set in England, I think about you.
I haven't seen that. I haven't seen Top Boy. I've been told I should watch Adolescent. Do you has that?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Everybody's telling me to watch that right now.
Yeah. And I just finished watching Toxic Town, which was really great, which was set in Northamptonshire, based on a true story. So yeah, that's one. But no, Top Boy.
Oh, that's with the actress from Doctor Who.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. She was the doctor before this current one, I think. So how are you? When did the book come out?
So the book came out 2 years ago, actually, around this time, 2 years ago. And it was funny, the other day I felt like something in my bones. And it was like, God, it's been 2 years, which in some ways has passed in a flash. And in another way, it's been interesting to have that space and that time and that distance, because now I just feel like, you know what? It is just a book. It's just a book. And I read on Substack the other day, people were getting really upset about, just whether their book sold, how many copies it sold, whether it didn't, just how it was received. And then somebody in Substack said, it's just a fucking book. And 2 years down the road, I'm like, bloody hell, that's true. And it makes it much easier to write a second book when you have that set, when the ego doesn't get in the way so much.
Man, writers are the worst. We're like awful combination of ego and self-loathing.
No, we really are. It doesn't bode well for our industry. So when the book came out, I was, I'd really, it was such a personal book. It's the story of my journey with my second son, who had an episode, his first episode of psychosis in 2009 at the age of 19 when I was living in Los Angeles. And I was already a writer, but I didn't dream of writing this book because I felt too full of shame and confusion and distress. And it seemed like I wasn't sure whether it was my story to tell. So it took a lot of years, and it kind of culminated with, I wrote an article that was picked up by the New York Times, and it got such a huge kind of reception. There were so many people that came forward and related to the story and said, like, that's my story. Thanks for telling it. And it just made me think, actually, maybe there's a book there in this experience of mine that might help me to understand what's going on and also to help others. I had a really short window to write it in because it sold on proposal. It sold in America and also in England. And when I started writing it, it was just before the pandemic. I came to England to try and find like more compassionate care for my son. It's been such a struggle and such a difficult journey. I think I was working with you some of that time, Chi, coming to classes when we were going through all of that. It was really one of the most frightening and confusing and conflicting kind of times really in my whole life. And I think the writing, it was like narrative therapy for me. It helped me to make sense. The deeper I went into the story, the more I edited, the more I found a voice and tools to look beyond what was happening on the surface, to dig a bit deeper and make a little bit more sense of it all. So 2 years on, it's published. I guess it did pretty well, but like we say, that combination of ego and self-loathing, part of me wanted it to be a bestseller. The other part was terrified that it would be. It did well, somewhere kind of in between, I guess. It got picked up in China. It's been published in China as well, which is pretty
cool. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's in 3 territories. I'm still sort of doing little bits and pieces around it. I'm writing another book now, and it's not a memoir. It's very autobiographically informed, but I want to say that it's autofiction just because memoir so much out of me.
Yeah. So when your son first had his psychosis, that was when he was at UCLA?
So he had just started UCLA. He was a really sensitive kid. He'd always been just extremely sensitive. And I remember him saying that he wasn't sure that he wanted to go and live on campus. I think he was nervous about, and we were like, you don't have to, but that's what everybody does, and you kind of should. And he did, and he smoked a shitload of weed, and he stayed up a lot of nights. There was all that academic pressure. He was sort of quite an academic person, and he really pushed himself hard. And I thought maybe it's a combination of no sleep and a lot of drugs and a lot of pressure that kind of caused that first break. But the first break didn't really go away or things didn't really get much better. And as time went on, in fact, it became more difficult and more challenging. And with each sort of episode and with more psychotropic drugs, I think that created its own issues, and also the trauma of being hospitalized each time. Like, he was this really sensitive kind of soul who was being like taken away in handcuffs and just with police and sirens flashing, and then just the way it affected his friendships, his relationships, the way it affected our family, his older brother. There was so much trauma that came on top of the original break.
Yeah.
I started looking back at what had happened in our family, and that's how I really want to relate to the theme of your podcast, like in terms of ghosts, because I always thought like, that's not something I really relate to. I've never seen a ghost. I've never heard a ghost, because I always thought about ghosts as that kind of, like I live in a Victorian house and I would have to see some, woman in a Victorian nightgown.
With like a little collar.
Yeah, or something, in the attic or
Yeah.
in the wardrobe, or here, like have this sort of apparition. And I don't really relate to that. But what I do think I really relate to is the idea of how generations that come before us that have died, that have had really a lot of trauma in their lives, how we pick up on that energetically and how we pass that on, not just through kind of spirit energy, positive or negative or otherwise, but through this thing known as epigenetics, which I've been studying a little bit.
Yeah. My therapist recommended I read a book called Inherited Trauma.
Oh, really?
So I read that, and it was like, it's wild, It's like the things that gets passed down to us genetically, like trauma getting passed down genetically, not just as a feeling, but just,
And it's also really interesting because it's such a new kind of area of study, how like scientifically it can be proven now because of like people that have been exposed to trauma, especially like in the womb, like the babies of the women who were escaping the Twin Towers. Those children, when they looked at their cortisol levels, they completely matched the children of Holocaust survivors and also veterans as well. They all have that similar profile. So something that starts as early as in the womb and then can be switched on and can be switched off because of the environment or because of certain behaviors. And I think when Jack first got ill, every psychiatrist I went to see said that, he had a broken brain pretty much, that this was just a biological thing. Nobody really asked me about what had happened in our lives or in our ancestors' lives. And I really think that the fact that you can't do a blood test to prove that somebody has schizophrenia, you can't do an X-ray, you can't do there's no physiological test, but there are tests to show that, like, because my grandmother, her last remaining relative, when she found out that he'd been killed at Auschwitz, she went completely mad and she was put in an asylum for the last 40 years of her adult life. And everybody just said, she was crazy and she was a bit strange and she was talking to voices and that they couldn't see.
She was touched.
Yeah, they said she was touched. And I think that the fact that, well, basically we weren't told that everybody believed she was dead. It was I guess it was like just after the war that she was put in the hospital. And at that time, it was such a shameful thing that it was better to pretend that somebody had died. That person was dead.
Sure.
So I grew up thinking that I didn't have a grandmother, and I never even thought to ask what had happened to her, how she died, where she was. She was so dead to everyone by then. She was just this void, there was just this emptiness that she didn't exist at all. But when I was 16, I found out that she'd been in a mental hospital that was close enough for me to have visited my whole childhood. I could have
Oh,
seen
no.
her, and I would have loved to have seen her. And I feel like she is the ghost in our lives, for all of us, because she's the person that we turned our backs on. And in Indigenous communities, you don't turn your back on your ancestors. You pray to them,
Sure.
dream about them, you trance dance with them. The community is so different. And I think here we pretend those people are dead, or we drug them and we put them in asylums, and we believe that when they're talking to voices that we can't hear, or when they see things that we can't see, we just label that as symptoms and not maybe that could be, some people say they're more in touch with the spirit world during that time than any other time in their lives. So that's my
Yeah.
ghost, that my grandmother. And also I feel like all the missing people, or there's so many missing people in our family. Like my dad left when I was 3 and I never ever saw him again. But he was like a ghost in my life, really, because my mum said that he used to drive with his arm out of the window. And so
Of the lorry.
no, not the lorry. That was my
Oh.
stepdad. No, this is my
Oh.
real dad. So when I used to go around, I would just always be looking for like a man who was driving with the window open with his arm on the window. So it haunted me, this vision, this idea. He haunted me, even though he left. I always wondered.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that, and then also like my mum had a sister that disappeared as well. My mum was in an orphanage, so a lot of trauma there. During the war, she was put in an orphanage, and her sister disappeared. And the last thing anybody got was a postcard from her saying that she'd changed her name to Monique and she was a bunny girl. And this was in the 1960s. And this is something that I never ever forget, that Auntie Maureen went to America, changed her name to Monique and became a bunny girl. And whether that was true or whether it wasn't. And I think I feel like those are the ghosts these
Yeah.
ghosts in my life, in my world, that
It is strange how we experience the absence of people, even people we never even knew.
yeah, definitely. And like my sister was a twin, and the other baby was stillborn. But in those days, they didn't, like, my mum was not allowed to hold that baby or grieve over that baby or bury that baby. And my sister feels that absence so strongly, even though we don't really know whether they were identical, whether they weren't, what happened exactly. But my sister is now like 50, and she's so lonely because of those first 9 months with this,
Yeah.
her in the womb, and then suddenly there's this separation. So I think, and that's her ghost. That's her ghost that she has to carry and make sense of. But I just think more and more, like, this person I was speaking to recently, she had psychosis, and she's an author. Her name's Emma Good, and she wrote a book called My Beautiful Psychosis,
Yeah.
because she really believed that her psychosis took her to a place that was so beautiful, where everything was so, the colors and the sounds and the world she inhabited in that state could only be described as really beautiful, even though people wanted to drug her out of it and see her as, ugly and crazy and mental. And she was telling me that there was this shaman who went into a psych ward, and he had the ability to see like the auras of people, like people that had this healing gift. And he was so despairing when he saw the state of the psych ward, because he said in his country, those people would have been shamans, their gifts would have been recognized. And instead, they were in this situation in the West where, those, because so many people that develop psychosis are really sensitive, really creative, really kind of like able, I think, to be between worlds, almost like what we would call medium.
Yeah.
Cheese.
Yeah. Last few months, I've been going through this brain journey to seeing neurologists, getting MRIs and EEGs, because a couple of years ago, I started having hallucinations like I'd never had before.
Wow.
Like I'd had them before, but not like this. And it lasted for like 2 months. At the same time, I was like dissociating really badly. Like I was literally watching my body moving around the apartment. Like that's how
God.
out of my body I felt. So I finally got like neurologist appointment and things. And then over the holidays, I started having hallucinations again.
Whoa.
So they brought me in for MRI and EEG. MRI was clean, but the EEG said I was having seizures.
Wow.
Like on the left side of my brain, and that's probably what's causing the hallucination,
God.
But it was this thing of like, they prescribed me this drug, and I was like, I don't want to take it.
Yeah.
Because I was afraid what it would do to me. Mainly, what if it chases away all my things?
Yeah.
Then what am I?
Yeah. Yeah, because that's part of you now. That's part of your kind of psyche. Are any of the hallucinations like really good, like a good trip? Like are some of them meaningful? And
The way a couple of years ago when it was really crazy, it was like I was hanging out with a friend like this, and on the wall behind her, like it was like a movie was being projected. So I was like narrating it to her, so I wouldn't feel like I imagined the whole thing later. Like I started telling her exactly what's going on. It kept happening over and over. And during the holidays, when I was flying out to LA for New Year's Eve, Christmas Eve, like while on the plane, I started having hallucinations. But it was wild. It was really wild. The one over the holidays was like, yeah, it's this thing of like, what am I if I lose this?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Because a lot of people that have hallucinations or that hear voices, when they go, they're the voices that are really important to them, that guide them, that feel like they're spirit guides or feel that they are compassionate and that they help them. Those are the voices that they really, really miss, especially if they're with them for a long time. Is that a common thing with epilepsy for people to have? Like, is that like the aura that they talk about, or?
yeah. So I didn't even know I was having seizures because it's like micro seizures in part of the brain. So it's not like epileptic. I'm not following that. Like there's no physical evidence of it.
Yeah.
But I would often see like a ring of light before everything begins,
I think they call that the aura. There's like some people have that before they even have like a proper seizure, like a big, like a grand mal or a petit mal they talk about. Gosh. So that's the first sign that it's coming then. That's the first sign when you see that light that.
Yeah, it's weird. Like it's almost like something is like gathering itself.
Wow.
And I go, uh-oh.
It's not like fight it. It's not like you can
Yeah.
like not.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is it a little
But
bit scary as well then? Is it quite a little bit frightening?
yeah, I mean it doesn't scare me that I'm having a hallucination. It's sometimes the content of it scares me,
Yeah.
because I don't quite know what's happening. Like, because it feels like memory almost.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think it could be memory? Is that what, like, the psychologists that got you to read that book, do they think that it could be memory or past lives or something, or somebody else's?
Yeah. I mean, like, I've been really obsessing over the idea that, because like a few months ago, like over the summer, I think, I was sitting at my desk like this, and I started remembering the moment I died.
Oh, whoa.
I was like, like I was in New York. It was when I was at NYU. I'm on the rooftop of the NYU Tisch building, and I fall off. And the memories of me falling, and I couldn't shake it for weeks. It was such a strange sensation.
And,
Yeah.
and did you ever go up to the roof and almost fall off? Did that ever almost
Well,
happen? Like,
let me
what
tell you.
precious memory now in your life that you remember?
Yeah. So my first month at NYU, I don't think I had more than like 2 meals. I was broke. Like, I was surviving. So there was like a mixer between the writing department and the film department. And of course, there were all these like donuts and chips and then like giant bottles of vodka. So I chugged that thing. And I think a bunch of us went up on the roof.
Yeah.
And then I remember the door locking behind us on the roof.
Gosh.
So anyways, I asked Judy was the year before us. So she was up there too, I think. So I asked Judy, like, do you remember us being on the roof? She was like, she didn't know me. She just knew of me. So yeah, we were up there. You were drunk.
God.
You got up on the ledge on the roof. And then she said, and then after that, I can't remember.
God.
I was like,
Maybe you did.
what? That's what I mean.
Oh, because, like, maybe there'd be people out there that would really believe that could have happened, and then you were
Yeah.
reincarnated or you
Yeah.
flew back into existence. Gosh.
But can I ask you something about your son?
Yeah.
Not about him per se, but about you experiencing him. What was it? Was it as he's struggling through his mental health thing? Like, what was it like watching him for you? Like, were there times where you're like, "Is that my son?"
Yeah, there were many times. I think it was quite excruciating, especially I am somebody who wants to fix everything and make everything better and think really cerebrally and logically and do the research. And so for many, many years, I thought if I found the right cocktail of drugs, or if I could find a psychiatrist to find the right drugs or the right therapist or the right diet, or if I'd caused it, if I could unlearn what I was doing to have caused it and make it better. So I spent a lot of time and energy trying to make it right rather than being with him and trying to accept and understand and make some meaning out of it. And I'm not saying that was wrong. I work with a lot of mothers now in the same situation, and I think it's really common to blame yourself for any kind of different
Sure.
disability that, you're like, God, was it my breast milk? Was there something in the womb? Was I exposed to toxins? Like, some people say that cat shit, if you handle cat litter, that it can cause toxoplasmosis, and toxoplasmosis in the womb can cause schizophrenia. So there's all kinds, you can really go down a rabbit hole in terms of trying to work out what it was that might have contributed to it. And I think now I've got to a place where it's still quite scary. I think I have some PTSD actually around what I witnessed and the fear of losing him, and also the anticipatory grief of having lost him as well. Like,
Mm.
there's, I think when somebody dies and you grieve and there's a certain amount of time, and then maybe life does resume and you can find some joy and meaning and move on to a degree. But I think when somebody has psychosis, that really your expectations are so shifted, and that everything that you thought, life just, I feel like my whole world just changed on its axis. And it was really difficult for me, especially because I'm kind of a little bit of an academic and he was very academic, and all the things that he wanted, I wanted for him. And we had this sort of closeness, that just a very similar way of looking at the world. So it was just quite a shock, because my eldest son was the one that was like, got into a lot, just crazy stuff, and didn't really do that well at school, and was a bit misunderstood, and was just a, kind of floated along, and was a musician and did his own thing and took probably a lot of drugs. And I thought, if anyone was going to kind of struggle, it would be that son. So it was really a shock to me on so many levels. And yeah, and I think in some ways it might be harder to watch than it might be to actually go through the experience. I don't know, I'm sure
Yeah.
it's awful to go through it, but at moments I think, for a mother or for a father, for a sibling, for a love, for somebody close to you to, be that distressed by these altered states. And it's very hard to reach my son as well, especially when he was so heavily drugged. Uh,
Yeah.
and the more time that went on, the more complicated it seemed. But I also feel like I've learned a lot through watching. I've learned a little bit, like, I can't control everything. And I really believed I could control everything at one point and fix everything and sort everything out. So I think it's taught me that I can't. It's also taught me about the power of community, because I think, like, as I was saying, like, there in the West, we do turn our back on our ancestors. We do become very individualistic because of the politics and the economic, just being in the West. But I think it taught me that I really need community. I need it as a writer, but I also really need it as a mother of a son with psychosis, because sometimes it's so hard to be in your own skin and to carry that weight of that loss and that grief. And sometimes when you hope year after year after year, the kind of hope, there's like this thorny edge. It's exhausting to have so much hope if things don't really change that radically. So the thing that saves me time after time is these other women that I've been, part of. Well, I teach quite a few of them now. So I have like students, mentees, and a lot of them are going through what I went through, but a little bit not as many years on, it's more recent.
Yeah.
And it's really so heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time to see them communicate with each other and offer each other solidarity. But there's also this political kind of advocacy as well that comes out of not wanting it to happen in the same way to others, and so to look at alternatives. So, like, just as I believe that some people that have psychosis, it's this kind of spiritual emergence for them, and there are groups of people that want to look at that and make sense of that. And there are also people that want to get off those drugs or taper down safely.
Yeah.
There are organisations that want to open homes where people aren't restrained and they're not drugged against their will and they're not kept forcibly locked up, because it's really inhumane. Like, I think like prison, really. I think the psychiatric hospitals, the level of the way human rights are so kind of just ridden over. And I think unless you have that happen to you in your family, it's one of those things, it's almost like hidden underground. And then I think when the media gets hold of something, like when, somebody kills someone and they have a mental health challenge, the way that's sensationalized and interpreted as like it's happened because all people with schizophrenia are violent and they're all going to kill you. So it's much
Sure.
they're locked up. So I think I don't know where I was going with all of that actually, but just community, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
And writing
Um,
makes sense of it.
have you has Zach talked to you about what what's been like for him going through it,
Yeah.
both in the worst of times and a little brighter times?
Yeah. Well, Zach only actually came out of hospital in November of last year. And this hospitalization, this last one, was the longest one ever. It was like 3.5 years. It was worse. It was
Oh wow.
prison sentence. And there's lots of political reasons for that. And one is that there aren't enough resources in the community to house people that have quite complex needs. And the longer somebody stays in hospital, often the more complex their needs become because they're so institutionalized then on top of everything that originated, and also the drugs long term at a very high dose. I think you're really right to be skeptical about those drugs that you were offered, because I think all of those drugs are like patented. They're tested for like maybe 6 to 12 weeks before they're marketed. And when people are on them for like years and years and years, they have done studies to show that they can be really damaging to not just the metabolic not just cause metabolic syndrome, but changes in the brain. So people often fare much worse on long-term high dosages of psychotropics than if they never ever started them, or if they just took them for a little while and came off them. So since Zach came out of the hospital, while he was in, I didn't really have much kind of clout to be able to do much at all to help. I saw him a couple of times a week for like maybe an hour. There were lots of rules and regulations. It was it was probably in some ways a harder journey than me not knowing if he was on when he was on the streets or when he was in and out of hospital, because it just felt so wrong on so many levels for him to be seen as so sick and be held the way he was. And there's lots of mental health laws around that are really hard to challenge. But I won't go into all of that. But since he's come out, it's been hopeful. Now he's in the community. They're starting to lower the drugs after many, many years.
Yeah.
He's got like compassionate staff a good team in the community. I can see him really regularly, and he can start to have a life again that's not like, it's almost like it's probably harder than being behind bars in a prison in some ways. I've spoken to prisoners and they've said that, like, I think that the sentiment of being a psychiatric patient, you're so much more patronized, you're so much more, othered really than in a prison system where, there are gangs and there are classes and there's just, I think the culture is a bit different. I'm not saying it's a great time, but
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So I think now I feel like there's a chance for Zach to kind of get his dignity back and build relationships and find himself. And I don't know what that will mean. I don't have any great expectations for him to do all the things he once thought he would,
Yeah.
but just to be free and maybe have more moments of joy and some function that makes him feel like, I don't know, a little bit proud of who he can be and what he can do. Because I think that's stripped away when you're a mental
Yeah.
patient. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you like back when you learn more about your, you said great grandma or grandma?
So my yeah.
Does Zach know about her? Did you tell Zach about her?
Yeah, because I thought for a time, I really thought, oh, okay. So if my grandmother was mentally ill, I kind of used that language, which I don't really use that language so much now because I think the idea of
Yeah.
this is really just like disabling, that kind of language. But I thought, oh, if I find out what my grandmother was diagnosed with, what medicine they gave her, and if she got a little bit better, then we can do the same with Zach and it will work because it's the same DNA. It's the same, part of the same
Yeah.
genetics. And that was really before I looked at like the trauma for her of coming over. Like she was one of the last people out of Eastern Europe. She was from Czechoslovakia. Her husband, my grandfather, was English. So because of that, they managed to get out. They got, I don't know, it was purported that they got one of the last boats out to come over to England. And then he had to go off. It was like very secret. He was doing work at Bletchley Park. Like there was a project decoding it was like a machine. There was a film that was made about it with Keira Knightley. I've forgotten what it was called, but there was this big, they got people that were linguists and chess and crossword experts and sort of like the cleverest people to try and work out the codes, to crack the code.
Yeah.
It's like the
Yeah.
machine or something. So my grandfather had to go off and it was top secret. He wasn't allowed to mention anything. He hardly came back at all. Whenever he came back, he gave her another baby. And like before long, she had 3 little tiny children during the war, not speaking English, like, feeling like a refugee, separated from this brother who was her last remaining kind of relative from the old country, and not being able to get him over. And then when the war ended, I think finally she found out that he had, been taken to Auschwitz. And I think it was just like she was bereft. And maybe today they would have been able to, like, she could have had some grief counseling and some good support. But instead, my grandfather just thought, oh gosh, that's not going to work. We can't cope with her talking to these, voices that we can't hear and seeing things that we can't see. And she's a danger to the children. So let's just lock her up. He got married again. And nobody knew. And I tried to get records to just find out, did she have a freaking lobotomy? Because in those days,
Yeah.
common to do that. Or, did she have ECT? And did they give her ice baths and mercury treatment? Or what the heck happened to this person? Oh, one thing actually that was interesting was that my father finally found out that his mother was still alive. He went to see her. He found out where she was. He went to see her. And I remember my mum saying that when he came back, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. That's what she said. He looked like he'd seen a ghost.
Oh my God.
In some way, he had seen a ghost, hadn't he?
Yeah.
It's like he thought his mum was dead.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But
So
anyway,
wild,
never
man.
found out what medicine she took or whether she had a lobotomy or what happened to her, because apparently there was a fire at the mental hospital and the fire
Good Lord.
destroyed almost all the records apart from a few admission records that said that she had systematized delusional disorder, which I don't even know what the fuck that means really. It might have been what we call schizophrenia today.
Oh my God.
That was what it said, non-congenital systematized delusional disorder upon her admission. And then she never, ever got out again. And I think nobody went to see her apart from I think in the early days, her daughter, my auntie, asked to go to see her. And the father said, no, it will upset you. Don't ever mention her name again. Don't talk about her again. Yeah. Can you imagine? Like your mum, she wanted to take her a little present that she'd bought with her first bit of pocket money or something. So I think, you know, that has to go somewhere. That trauma has to go
Oh yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
I
definitely.
think it comes through. And I think, you know, I was thinking about like what's going on in Gaza and just like, you know, that's not just going to end. That's those children that grow up to be
Hmm.
more children, and not just Gaza, like places like, even, you know, when you think about America and Australia and New Zealand, places built on racism and imperialism, like you see in the psych wards, you see a lot more black men. You know, that's not about black men being more crazy than white men. That's about, you know, colonialism,
Yeah,
trauma and inherited trauma.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
What is it like? It's such a unique situation. Like, what is it like? If you have to describe what it's been like to have so many family members, including a grandma you didn't even know
Yeah.
was alive,
Crazy. Yeah.
a sister with a twin
Yeah.
stillborn,
Yeah.
your son, going through his stuff. What is it like to know so many of your family members are
Yeah.
kind of not there?
Yeah, or mad. They're mad or they're missing. Yeah, they're mad or they're missing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's really interesting, Chi. There's this thing that I heard about and I thought, oh, it's a bit woo-woo and I don't know if I believe in it. It's called a family constellation therapy. And I just thought, oh, I don't know if I really believe in spirits and ghosts and all of that. And it's not so much about epigenetics. It's more about sort of energy, and the energy that if somebody dies with all of that trauma that's just not resolved, that can still be in the world and it can actually lodge in a sensitive person. So people get together and they play the role of family members. So you might take an issue, you might take a challenge or trauma. So I might go and say, you know, I have this son who has been diagnosed with psychosis, and I also have this grandmother that had psychosis. So
Mm.
there's the people that go with the issue, and then there's people that act out the ancestors, and it's almost like staged. So like somebody will play my son,
Oh, okay.
might play the grandmother. And I think that you talk to them, you try and resolve, you try and understand what they've been through, to almost like have this sort of reconciliate, this kind of clearing of what's happened. And maybe once they feel like they've been understood or recognized, there can be some peace in the person that's struggling on earth right now, that, you know, the person who's alive. So like my son, or everybody in the family that is kind of a part of what has happened. And during lockdown, I thought, oh, I'm going to try this because I want to write about it for the book. So I want to write about everything that I can think of that might help for the book.
Mm.
Into it like with this sort of sociological mindset, like, oh, this is an experiment, you know, I'm just going to see what this is about because I think it's all really weird and wacky, but I just want to write about it. And it was during lockdown. And I think because I went into it with that mindset and with those lens, I couldn't take it seriously. It felt woo-woo to me. And it was online, it wasn't in person. And the person who was running it was running it from Turkey and speaking Turkish. There was a translator. I just thought, I don't even know if I can really write about this. It's so weird. Well, I want to do it again, and I want to take it seriously, and I want to do it in person. And I've heard that there are some people that are really meant to be very good at it.
What do you think you'll get out of it this time doing it again?
I think I might be able to just really, I'm not sure. I think I might be able to connect and communicate with, you know, because we are all energy, you know, we are all connected, all of us as humans, whether you're, you know, a Buddhist that meditates every day, or whether you're, you know, somebody that doesn't believe in any of that. the reality is that we all are energy, and so there is that. So I think I want to try and see what, how Clotilde is. Her name was Clotilde Tilly, how she is, where she is, what might be left with her, and recognize that and understand, and maybe apologize, and maybe see if I can reach some peace before I die and transmit that somehow to. And so maybe Zach, something will shift. People have said that when they've done these things, something has shifted, and maybe they just believe so hard in it. It's almost like, when you a drug that isn't a real drug at all, and it does the job. So yeah, I'm just more fascinated this time, I think, for myself, not just for the book, for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a last question for you. Not so much right now, but over the years as you were going through it with your son, both here in the US and there, you were experiencing grief, right? Like, I'm always curious of how do we grieve someone who's still there?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. And I think that it can be really hard to go on grieving indefinitely. Like, it's been 15 years really, and I still have a lot of grief, and not just about my younger son, but about my wife and about my older son, like what they've had to go through and how it's affected us all as a family. Because I think these things don't just affect the person who has the psychosis. I think it's like the family, the community, the wider community, the world. These things like they I feels like a ripple in the water, or when a tree falls, the effect is not just for the immediate person that's taking care of them, but for the community as a whole. And I think that's why in societies like more sort of tribal or indigenous societies, where everybody is important in the village and everybody has a role and a responsibility, people that have whatever you want to call it, they do so much better, and their visions and their voices are less violent, because everybody has a vested interest in them being well and the way they're perceived. So I think it's quite different. But yeah, my grief, I think I've learned to move my body quite a lot, to get in cold water every week. I go and jump in the lake, even through the winter, in like when the water's less than 5 degrees, to try and just not have to think for a few minutes, to just concentrate on just staying alive. Different kinds of therapies, meditation, just a lot to try and deal with it. But I still feel it, Chi. I still feel it very, very profoundly. And I think it's aged me, and I think it's changed me, some for the good and some not so good. But yeah, I can't give up completely, hoping that there will be some change, and also speaking about it, so that if there's not much change for us, but maybe future generations, things will be
Sure.
a little bit different.
Sure.
Yeah.
This might be a weird question or even inappropriate. I actually don't know. But I want to ask, do you ever imagine your life if Jack hadn't had to deal with this?
Yeah.
What it would have been like?
Oh my God. Yes, I do. And then I try not to be resentful, and I try to lean into my life as it is and be grateful for what it is. But I think, I think I might have written more than one book. I think I might have, maybe had a career where I could have earned money and had a pension and, had responsibility that meant that, I wasn't just reliant on my wife to keep me and to, allow me to be able to write this book, because I couldn't really work full time and take care of my son and write. I think
Yeah.
or travel. But I think most of all, I just think to have had, because my older son seems very affected as well by what happened. And I just think it feels quite sad sometimes to have brought somebody into the world who has suffered so immensely. And, you know, just when I think about what he wanted to do, how much ambition he had, he wanted to travel, he wanted to teach, and sometimes I just imagine if life had been like that, if the trajectory had been what I had expected. And I sometimes feel like when people complain about things that seem so petty to me and so kind of minor, and I just think, gosh, try, see what it's like actually. There is like suffering. I do think there are different scales of suffering, and it is really hard to have somebody that you love so deeply, who you carried, for all that time and who you raised. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. But then also, I think it can be quite disabling to live with that degree of loss. Also, I don't want Zach to feel that when I look at him, it's, with pity or remorse or regret.
Mhm.
That's going to
Yeah.
lead also into like, well, you're not, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for you to be the person that, I want you to be, and
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not a way of being with somebody either. So I think it's about trying to tread this line of acceptance and love and compassion, which can be really fucking hard sometimes, and self-love and compassion. And yeah, shit happens, doesn't it? And like, I think there's this thing
Mm.
in AA where people are like, why me? Why me? And then in AA, they say, well, why not you? Why not you? It's
Yeah.
true, isn't it? It's true.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
man, listen, Tanya, I love you so much.
You too. I miss.
And I missed you. I missed you so much over the years.
Yeah.
It's funny that even with all this stuff, like every time we've actually sat down together for anything,
Yeah.
there's guaranteed to be laughter.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. Well, come to
Yeah,
London, Chi. Come to London.
I want to. I want to.
Come see me.
Oh, please show everyone your book,
Yeah.
The Zig-Zag Boy.
Yeah.
Is it out in the US? It's out in the US.
So this
right?
is actually the US. Yeah, this is actually the US cover. It was with
Oh, cool.
Norton. It came out with Norton in America. And then
Uh-huh.
it's the UK. This one's the paperback edition of the UK. It's also on audio as well. I recorded it. That was quite an adventure. Yeah. And yeah.
Did you record an American version where you tried to talk without a British accent?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, actually. I think there were a few Americanisms in there that changed.
Yeah.
This one. But no,
Yeah.
thanks, Chi, over the years for just, all your advice and your listening and your kind of just guidance, because I think it's made me the writer that I am, and also more importantly, the teacher that I am as well. So I'm really grateful for that. Yeah.
Thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you again, everyone listening in to this amazing conversation with dear friend, amazing writer, Tanya Frank. Please pick up a copy of her book. Man, I'm just so full of thoughts and feelings right now. But see you again next episode. Peace out.